All right, so at this point, I've been using the iPhone 17 Pro for nearly 150 days as my daily driver, give or take a few weeks here and there because I've also been testing other phones in that time period, but this was the phone I was using like 90% of the time. And now that most of the hype, I guess, is over and I've spent so much more time with it, I think it's the right time to revisit it and talk about some of the things that I've grown to really like and also dislike about this phone. With that being said, I want to start with talking about some of the cons of this phone. And in no particular order, the first one I think is the price. So at $1,100 USD or 1,800 Canadian dollars, this is not a cheap phone by any means. That's a lot of money to be paying for a phone. And it becomes difficult to justify this, especially if you are just an average user. You're going to use it for like calling, texting, browsing, watching videos, stuff like that. Now, for me, buying this phone was actually a no-brainer. It was very justifiable because I actually use it like a professional camera as well. I'll talk more about that a little bit later when we talk about the pros, but generally speaking, this is an expensive phone, and I think for a lot of people, it might just make sense to just buy the base model 17. Number two is the colors. Yes, it would have been nice to have this phone available in a few more colors, especially black, although I don't think this silver is a bad color. I just wish there were a few more options. Number three is the size of this phone. So I'm not particularly a fan of how big this phone is. Now, this is pretty subjective because it really comes down to the size of your hand, but for me, it's not exactly easy to use this phone with one hand. It's really more of a two-hand phone for me, or at least it's comfortable to use it with two hands, not one hand. This is a trend that we have been noticing for the past several years. This phone has a 6.3-inch screen, which is bigger than the iPhone 15 Pro screen, which was 6.1 inches, which was bigger than the iPhone 10 screens, which was 5.8 inches. It has slowly been getting bigger and bigger. And it makes sense because the iPhone 17 Pro Max or the Pro Max models are by far the most popular iPhone models. So it just seems like people like big phones, but that's not the case for me. In fact, the iPhone 13 mini and the 12 mini were some of the best iPhones I've ever used in terms of the size. I really enjoyed using those. Number four is the camera control button. And this one's kind of weird because there are some parts of it that I really like and some parts of it that I really don't like. So when this phone came out, in my initial review, I think I said that I do not like it at all. I don't use it at all. And it was true back then, but as we have here in Canada moved into some of the colder months like October and November and December, January and February, all of those, and I've started to wear gloves, I've realized that it's actually very useful to have this button over here to take photos when you're wearing a glove, because I can just pull out my phone, press the button to launch the camera app, and then press the button again to take a photo, all without having to take off my gloves, which is very useful. But other than that, all the haptic features about the camera control button, I do not like at all. I turned them off almost immediately after setting up this phone and have never found the need to turn them on again. Number five actually has to do with software. So when it comes to AI and smart features, this is actually a pretty dumb phone, especially compared to Android phones. I think right now that's one of the biggest things that's different about Androids and iPhones, generally speaking, because Androids have so much more smart features and AI and this and that, whatnot. iPhones, on the other hand, almost don't have any of that. They do have some of those things, but all the AI features they do have kind of suck anyways. So that's something that I do miss on iPhones. And that's one of the biggest reasons why I actually wanted to switch to the Pixel. And I did switch to it, but at the same time, I didn't really find myself using those features a lot. So I'm not even sure if that's really a con, but I do feel like there are some features on Android that are genuinely useful. For example, something as simple as the voice recorder. On Pixel, it is great. It records and transcribes in real time, which I think is very useful. Same thing can't really be done on the iPhone unless you use something like the Plaud NotePro, which is by far the best way I have found to do the same thing. But unlike the Pixel, this thing is literally built from ground up to do just that. Record and transcribe. This is a quick test I ran between the Plaud NotePro and the iPhone, and it is just mind-blowing how much better and more accurate it is, which makes this incredibly reliable. I have personally used these in my workflow, for example, when attending tech launch events, because I just like to record the whole keynote, so I don't have to worry about missing something important, because I can literally just ask Plaud anything. For example, I can ask, what was the battery life of the phone that they talked about at the event, and it actually answers from the recorded content. So there's basically zero chance of any hallucination. And in the Plaud app, I can see the whole transcript with speaker labels and checklists and even a summary of all the key points. Not to mention, it can record for 30 to 50 hours non-stop because it's separate from my phone, so I don't have to worry about any kind of calls or text stopping the recording or even the phone battery running out. Honestly, if you're someone who attends a lot of meetings and you find yourself taking a lot of notes, this thing can be a game changer. It supports 112 different languages too, so it's great for a vast majority of people. I'll leave links below, check it out. Okay, now let's talk about some of the things that I really like about this phone. And by far the biggest one, in my opinion, has to be the battery life. So this phone has a 4,252 milliamp hour battery inside, which is a pretty significant jump from the older iPhone. And it's actually noticeable. You can actually tell the difference from day-to-day usage. I've mentioned in my review video for this phone that it is totally possible to get 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 hours of screen on time on this phone and still have a few percent remaining at the end of the day, which is very impressive in my opinion. However, for me, it's not as important to get like 8, 9 hours of screen on time every single day because I'm not someone who uses the phone that much every single day. But what is more important for me is the fact that this phone lasts a few days without having to charge every single day. So I think just yesterday, I was using this phone and I was at the gym and I noticed that it was at 1%. Why? Because I hadn't charged it for 3 days. That's right. So for me, that is incredibly valuable, just having that level of peace of mind when it comes to the battery. I can charge it to 100%, and if I have like a long road trip ahead of me or, whatever, this phone has been incredibly reliable. But on top of that, it also charges pretty fast. So in case you do manage to kill it in the same day, you can plug it into a charger and have, 20, 30, 50% fairly quickly. Now, me personally, I have almost never charged this phone using a wire just because I don't really feel the need to do that. I just use wireless charging. Every night, I just put it on my wireless charger, and that seems to get the job done. That seems to work very well for me. But then here's the thing, because this phone has such a good battery life, there are a few other things that come with that. For example, when it comes to the battery health of this phone, it degrades a lot slower when your battery isn't running out completely every single day. For example, I have been using this specific 17 Pro for about 4 months or 5 months, I think, because I got this one at the beginning of October because this is like the second 17 Pro I had because I switched the colors, So anyways, I think right now I have like 76 battery cycle count, and you kind of average that out, I think it comes to just over like 50% battery usage every single day, which means when Apple created this phone, and if they intended it to have 80% battery health after 2 years, I might not get to 80% battery health after 2 years. I might get to the 80% mark after maybe 3 years or maybe 4 years, which just means this phone is going to last longer than it normally would, like a normal iPhone would. So if you're someone who likes to keep your phone for a few years, then this is the one you're going to want to get because the battery life is so good. It degrades slower. And then you can further slow down the battery degradation by setting a charge limit. I've mentioned this in my review video as well, that because the battery life is so good, you can set a charge limit. For example, you set it to 80 or 90%. So the phone will only charge up to 80 or 90%, whatever you set it to, which further slows down battery degradation, which is again good if you want to keep this phone for a long time. So lots of good things when it comes to the battery. Totally A+ over here. The second thing I really like about this phone are the cameras. I've talked a lot about them in my review video. The ultra wide, the main camera, the telephoto, and the selfie camera. They're all great. They are sharp with plenty of detail. They look good, good dynamic range. They're great in pretty much every aspect. But here's the thing, as I've continued to use this phone more, I've actually used more of the pro video features, especially the log video, and I found it to be incredible. So good that I've actually started using this phone as a second camera in my workflow. There are videos on the channel already that exist that you have probably already watched that have footage from this camera, and it's mixed together with footage from this camera, which is a 4,000 Canadian dollar setup. So if you couldn't tell, it's a very clear indication that this camera is really good. And that's one of the biggest reasons why getting this phone just made so much sense for me, because before this phone came out, I actually was looking to get a second camera because I needed it for a top-down angle. Now, if I did go out and buy a second camera, I would have to spend at least $2,500 to maybe $3,000, $4,000 to get the kind of quality that is good enough to, be equivalent to this camera. But then this phone came out and I decided to buy it and actually test it for this very scenario. And it turned out to be amazing. Like seriously, I've used it and I've been impressed by the quality. So buying this phone meant that I upgraded my phone. I got the second angle that I was looking for. The quality is just as good, so I didn't compromise on that. Or I guess the quality isn't literally like one-to-one, but it's good enough that I'm satisfied with it. And number 4, I can carry a really good camera around with me everywhere I go, which is not something I could have done with the other camera. So it just made perfect sense to get this phone. It was justifiable. 100%. But of course, I understand that not all of you are in my situation or a similar situation to me. You probably don't need all the pro features of this phone. And in that case, it might not actually make sense to get this phone, but I'll get back to that in a little bit. Let's talk about the third thing that I actually kind of like about this phone, and it's actually eSIM. I have found out that it's actually not that bad, and it's actually pretty easy to switch, at least between iPhone to iPhone if you are switching your number. I've done it multiple times with zero issues, but I think it's a little bit harder to switch from like iPhone to Android. I think that requires a little bit more effort, but I could be wrong about that. But generally speaking, eSIM hasn't really been an issue, or at least as much as I thought it would be. It's actually fine. And in some ways I like it because I am switching phones all the time. And with eSIM, I don't have to, carry a SIM ejector tool or go around looking for one. Number 4, contrary to popular belief, I think, is the design. I actually like the design of this phone. So sure, it's easier to scratch and get dented, but if you're gonna use a case, which I am, and I think a lot of you will also, it's really not an issue. Like, I have 0 scratches on this phone and I've been using it with a case and I've had 0 problems. However, I do think on camera, you might think, or I think anyone might think, that the older iPhone design actually looks better. Even I think on camera, the older iPhone looks better, but I think in person, when you actually hold this phone, it actually doesn't look that bad. But overall though, I think this iPhone has more of a utilitarian design, while the older iPhone design was more premium. And that's also true literally because it doesn't have that same premium material like titanium. It has aluminum, which is not as strong, so that also has to do with that. But design isn't something that I don't like. And last but not least, when it comes to the screen, there are 2 things that I really like. Number 1 is how dark the screen can get. These days with phones coming out and pushing for the absolute highest brightness numbers like 2,000, 3,000 nits and whatever, which this phone also has, don't get me wrong. This phone gets incredibly bright and it's very easy to use it outdoors, even directly under sunlight with 0 issues. I think now it's more important to also focus on the other side of the spectrum, how dark the screen can get. I think that's also very important because there are times when you find yourself using your phone in a dark environment. I think it plays a huge role in the overall experience of using this phone, which is something I feel like other phones are kind of ignoring, at least from the ones I have tested. And number 2, when it comes to the display, especially if you're coming from a few-year-old iPhone, I think having the always-on display is pretty cool. It's a small, subtle feature, but I think it also makes a slightly big difference when it comes to the overall experience of using this phone. I find it very useful, just to check the time when your phone's just, sitting on your table or something. And so those are all the things that I really like about this phone. Now, you might have noticed that I didn't really talk about the performance at all. And that's just because with phones these days, especially when we're talking about flagship phones, I genuinely don't think it's even worth talking about the performance because almost all of them are so good, so powerful that they're all more than good enough and fast enough for all kinds of tasks or everyday tasks that you're gonna do, like calling, browsing, watching videos, and even playing games, even intensive games. And that's also the case for this phone. It handles pretty much every single thing perfectly fine. I haven't used it for any kind of gaming at all, but I also haven't ran into any issues whatsoever. So there you have it. That's my experience with this phone after several months of using it. Overall, I genuinely think it's a really good phone, but again, it's difficult to recommend it, and that's mainly because of the price and the fact that the iPhone 17, the base model iPhone 17 exists. It's just so good that you're getting basically like 90% of the 17 Pro for a lot cheaper. So for most people, I think it makes sense to just get that phone, unless you're someone who absolutely will be using the Pro features that you will be paying for on this phone. But if you're not sure about that, I've actually created an entire video going into like a deep dive of talking about pretty much every single feature that is different between the 17 Pro and the base model 17. I'll link that video here. Check it out. I think you will find it really helpful, and I will see you there.